I am here today with Arif Anis, who I was able to meet through Gennady, a friend of mine that I met over the summer. And Arif and I had a beautiful conversation a couple of months ago, and he just blew my mind. He is brilliant, international speaker, best-selling author, was just awarded Brain of the Year, also one of the top 100 most influential people in the UK. I mean, honestly, if you go to his website, which I'll show you here, it just goes on and on and on about his amazing accomplishments. I asked him if he would please come into the NGNG community to share some of his wisdom. He's getting ready to launch another amazing book, Made in Crisis, that launches January 2021. So I want to dig into the book. I want to dig into your past book, I Am Possible. I want to dig into your speaking and your goals and your brilliant wisdom. Marie, thank you so much for being here.
Amber is such a privilege. No guts, no glory.
No guts, no glory. I know, right? That's really important. You
Absolutely.
have to remember that. I wanted to show people your website while giving you an opportunity to
Oh,
tell us a little bit more about your story. For those who have not heard of you before, what's the journey to get to this point where you're about to launch this new book with Hay House?
well, thanks so much, Amber. It's around 35 years long journey. So it started as a shepherd in a God-forsaken village in Pakistan, very remote place from civilization. And then, yes, there's no turning back since then. So it went on and on. And I'm a writer. I'm a psychologist. I became a therapist on the way, and then wrote many books. I'm Possible, you mentioned, is one of them. Follow Your Dreams, you mentioned, that's one of them. And the most recent, which is Made in Crises, that's co-authored by myself and my very good friend Kaiser Abbas. So this will be hitting the shelves in January 2021. So this entire journey could be summed up in few words: no guts, no glory.
Yeah.
But yes, it all started with the dream, and then following that dream vigorously, chasing it, and giving it all what we have. So yes, I've been lucky. Things have been happening, and a good noise has been made. And I think we all started with that dream to change the world to a little extent, and I'm so glad that this is happening.
Talk to me about your experience of this year, because you and I had a pretty interesting conversation about the pandemic and the psychology of what people are experiencing right now and how you can really see opportunity in the midst of a crisis. Can you dig into what was your experience of this year?
Yes, we were all caught kind of unawares. All of us, we started very differently with a different mindset and different ambitions when the clock struck 2020. None of us actually prepared for what was in store.
Yeah.
And that's why this particular book, because I was struck by all this, all the crisis, all this unprepared stuff. We never knew that, we never wanted it, and we never saw it coming. And in December last year, I traveled. Actually, another book of mine was launched, and I traveled, and I was just actually on the road for a couple of thousand miles, and January looked so fabulous. And before we knew, in February, we already started getting the news, and then it was a downhill since then. So we found out that somehow we are not ready. Somehow we lack a lot. Actually, in the book, I mentioned about the Global Crisis Index. That says in January 2020, in the Time Weekly, that two of the most ready countries in the world, who are better ready to face any kind of crisis in the world, are the United Kingdom and the United States of America. Right.
Mm.
And this is January 2020. And right in March and April, we find out, oh my God, no, they're not. And actually, this was the acid test. that they tested organizations, they tested leaders, they tested countries that no, you're not ready. And there's a big chunk missing in our strategy. And he also found out that it's the crisis leadership strategy of the entire world that's in shambles. And we started picking up the pieces as we all grew in the last 8 to 10 months, and we're coming out stronger. But yes, 2020, it became a test that most of us failed.
Mm. And what do we do now with that information? How can we turn it around and see a measure of success? What do we do from here?
What I found actually that it was less of an economic crisis, but more of a spiritual crisis and a spiritual challenge.
Yes.
To defeat COVID-19, humanity needed and it still needs to follow the path of self-purification, compassion, non-violence, God in nature, right? So that's how I look at it. That this was a big question mark, and this question mark asks us to take a second look at everything that we're doing. The pandemic raises serious questions about the way the world has been run in the last 5 to 7 decades, like since
That's
the
right.
World War II ended, by using greed, power, lust, and obnoxious use of the privilege. And this pandemic has laid bare what was already obvious, but we buried our heads in the sand like ostriches. But we found that now, and this is the wake up call. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. So what are you going to do with the wake up call? How have you personally shifted during this time? And what do you want to do from here?
I actually want to, as we all experience this, suddenly the big brands and all the luxuries and all what has been holding so much of meanings. I wouldn't say that it was rendered meaningless, but somehow it took a back seat. And we found out what's more important. Like the human connections are more important, and actually serving the humanity, that's more important. And while find all the Gucci's and Louis Vuitton and all and Fendi and all them, they're actually great. But we need to exist. We need something crucial, and that's love. That we need a bridge actually to get across each other, to communicate with each other, and the thing that's been my big learning from these last 8, no, 9, 10 months.
Yeah. I've actually been waiting for this moment to happen for about 3 years because in the online world, which is where I spend my time, I have seen and observed all of these internet marketers that are talking about automation and funnels and push your leads through to convert. This is the language that we're using to talk about the clients and customers that we want to attract in. And I'm watching
Absolutely.
this, and I just can't even believe that our leaders online are talking about basically treating people like a herd of mooing cows going through a one-way channel. And I've
Absolutely.
been over here saying, wake up, world. It's about the meaningful connection that you can create. I'm not against automation. I think that automation is what enables us to get,
Oh yeah.
faster at our craft and allows us to impact more people. But at least be aware and conscious about how to experience that meaningful connection throughout the different touch points of automation. So this is something that I've been talking about forever. For example, when you are recording a video, you're doing a live streaming. If you are too surface and generic and try to do it for the masses, it's not going to really resonate with anybody on a deep, soulful level. But when you really drive your energy forward and you set your intention, it's not about you, it's about the person you're in service to, the person you're in service to, then all of
Absolutely.
a sudden the person on the other end, they just feel different. They think you're actually talking directly to them and they open up to you, and that's when the connection happens, especially if you're speaking based on your values and your belief system and you're sharing openly about your perspective. So Arif, I have to say, you're hitting on a really important point here, and I know you show up in that way. So that's another reason I'm so excited that you're here having this conversation with me.
Such a privilege. And you already said it's not saying it from air, it is actually saying it from your heart. And actually meaning it and living it. It's not only just saying it, it's walking your talk. Because what happened since the World War II, most of the world somehow we became hostage of our own narratives, and we stopped walking our talk. We say great stuff, we advertise great stuff, whether we are nations and we're leaders, but then we don't walk that talk. And 2020 became that test that exactly brought this whole thing right in the fray, and we found it. All right, we've been just caught with our pants down, right? And this is what I'm saying from my experience working with the first world countries where we thought that we've got everything in place. Where we were waging all those, Star Wars and that kind of trillions of dollars of expense. And suddenly we found out that, all right, we don't have enough PPE for our doctors. We don't have enough to save our communities and the vulnerable people. And this is something, actually, I co-founded 1 Million Meals campaign in the United Kingdom. Now, just imagine that it was March 2020, and the government announced the lockdown, and the doctor and nurses, they didn't have anything to eat. Like they didn't have any pubs, any restaurants, any canteen to turn to, while they were on the forefront of saving the rest of us. And it was actually, I would say, it was a wake up call in many ways. Going to the hospitals, seeing them working 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours long shifts, and sometimes not eating anything in the last 8 to 10 hours, just being there while struggling with everything. And then I found out, all right, okay, so no, we don't have everything that should have been there. Our priorities are misplaced, and our heart is not at the right place. And that's what I believe. This is one thing. Now, all the pandemics somehow left us enriched. They taught us something. And probably this pandemic taught us that we need to get our priorities right.
I know. I'm grateful for it. I mean, obviously, I'm struggling like everybody else with what shifted in our world as a result of the pandemic. It's very hard for me to feel like certain parts of my freedom has been stripped or lessened. It's important to me to exercise that as much as I can. And yet, it's such a beautiful wake up call for everybody, just as you mentioned. And something that I'm curious about is, do you feel that the average person out there is waking up to this on their own, or do you feel like people are still in a bit of a daze and a fog and they're not sure how to wake up to this? Do you have any observation about that or what we can do?
It's a brilliant question, and I would say that this waking up doesn't come easy, right?
No.
This is a painful trip, and that's how I look at it. In Chinese language, because the reference is made in crisis, we all are ordinary people until a crisis finds us
Hmm.
and gets the extraordinariness out of us. In fact, we all are typically, we all walk in sleep until something hits us, and we're suddenly out of slumber. But then, is everyone out of slumber? That's the big question. And probably I would say no, right? Because it doesn't happen on its own. That's a very conscious journey. It's a very conscious travel that we take. And until and unless we have that conscious, sometimes painful journey, because we find out what we did, we find out where we stand, we find out what we belong to, we find out the purpose in our lives, and we need to ask ourselves hard and tough questions. And most of us actually wouldn't ask these questions. So yeah, there are people who are asking themselves these questions and they're waking up. There are more people that need to ask themselves those questions and need to wake up. So yes, this is a big pursuit, and a challenging one, but this is something which is worth it. Absolutely. And I would actually mention this Chinese thing. In Chinese, the Chinese symbol for danger and opportunity is the same thing, right? In Chinese, when actually
Really?
you, yeah, you actually got down crisis, at the same time, that means opportunity, right? So this is such an amazing thing in Mandarin, in fact. And this is how, if you look at this, that every crisis, when it hits us, at the same time, it opens many doors. It gives us that wake up call. It gets the best out of us. And suddenly, life means different. It opens a new vista, a new window. And if this crisis can do this, I still think probably it's all worth it.
Oh my gosh, I'm loving this conversation. To those of you who are viewing, drop a comment in your chat box below. Let us know what aha you've had so far or what questions that you might want to ask to engage in this conversation with us. I love that you said danger and opportunity are the same. That's so great. This is a question that has been plaguing me. I have people in my network that get it at a mental level, you know, that like there's an awakening that's happening. They kind of want to go deeper, but they don't know how. They don't really know how to access it. And for me, I've just leaned in for so long that it's, you know, it's what I do now, right? I know how to go deep. I know how to ask the bigger questions. But for people who really have a desire to awaken to their consciousness, but they literally don't know how to, what advice might you give them? For me, I might talk about pay attention to the feelings in your body, and I kind of integrate that into part of the experience. But I'm curious what you might say to that.
I would actually, well, I wouldn't say that you need to buy this Made in Crisis to find it out. But yes, we tried cracking that kind of code. We tried cracking that kind of code for organizations, for people, for individuals. And as I said, we need to observe the pain points in our lives. If we start looking back and we look back at our lives, our careers, our relationships, our business, whatever, if we start looking at the pain points, usually, in my view, these are the indicators that these are the indicators actually that can crack open that particular path from which the light enters. Great Rumi said, that pain is the point sometimes where the light enters your body, right? When
Mhm.
you crack open, right, somehow the light actually finds you and it enters your body, it enters your consciousness. So I think the pain points could be a very good way to assess that, because suddenly you can put things into perspective and you can start knowing that no, this haze, this walk in sleep is not worth anymore, and a conscious effort needs to be carried out so that you can carve out what you really stand for. And for me, and for many people I've been coaching, this has been working wonderfully well.
Wow. I'm taking so much, so many notes up here. This is really valuable. I'm curious in your upcoming book, is there a story that you tell in that book, maybe of yourself or a client or somebody that you've come across in your journey? Is there a story that stands out to you as one of your favorite, where you just delighted in writing about it, where it was meaningful to you?
All right, you got me. Like, I'm a storyteller, and I love stories, and we all love stories. So in this book, there are many stories. We actually got in touch with Amazon and Elon Musk, and this Zoom founder, and some of the world movers and shakers who have turned themselves around and their businesses around during this crisis time. So there are many stories about everyone, and I would actually love to mention. Yes, there's something right after this story I would mention, and that's something that absolutely moved me. But before I get there, the stories. So there's this chief executive of a big company, and he's taken up by He's consumed by a crisis, and he's so much frustrated, so much upset that he he tries to find out the way, but couldn't. So he goes to his father, in fact, who's been a senior chairman in that company, but now retired. He goes to him and wants his word, his wisdom to resolve that crisis. So his father takes him to the kitchen. In the kitchen, there are some carrots, there are some eggs, and then there's some tea, which is so these three things. And he says, "All right, son, just look at me and watch." So he does what? He starts boiling water and he puts the carrots in there, and then he puts the egg in there, and then in another utensil he boils the water and throws the tea in there, tea or coffee, whatever you say. So what happens, as we all understand, when you boil carrots, carrots are hard, but they go soft.
Mm.
Eggs are soft, but they go hard. And we understand what tea or coffee does to water. He said, look, the crisis impacts us all differently. Sometimes we are strong, but when we are boiled, we become lukewarm. We get soft in the process, right? Sometimes we are fragile and we are soft, but then the crisis, the hot water of life, that turns us into something hard, maybe cold, right? Sometimes it adds some stony touch to us, our peasants. And sometimes, most amazingly, when the when the light hard water, boiling water actually consumes us, and we act like tea or coffee, we absolutely change the whole ingredients, the whole experience of that water, because now that water is tea or that water is coffee. So he said, you need to look at yourself, how you are reacting to that crisis. Are you becoming cold hearted or stony or frigid or warm, or you are actually consuming this so much in a manner that you are changing the entire experience? So this is one of my favorite stories.
You have to tell that story on every interview that you do from here on out. That was awesome.
Yes, Amber. No guts, no glory. No guts, no glory. Actually, it's so much closer to the very meanings of made in crisis, right? Because these are the crises that if you have guts, in fact, then there's glory. But then, yes, there's painful journey towards that, and that's why I believe we all are made by crises that we face and the way we interact and we respond to them.
I agree
And
completely.
one thing, yes, sorry,
Yeah.
I shouldn't forget, during this time while writing this book, something that I always felt about, I learned about it, and I loved about it. That is that I found out that compassion is one of the biggest muscle a leader can hold. Compassion. And coming from actually the kind of background I had, I was the one actually sometimes way back, I took compassion as weakness, right? But
Mm.
then I found out, no, it's one of the biggest muscle that you can have. It's one of the strongest muscle that you can have. And particularly, I quoted, in fact, we quoted in the book, when you look at Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, or Germany's Angela Merkel, right, or Denmark's Matt Frederiksen, or Taiwan's Chai Ching-wen, and Finland's Sanna Marin, in fact, these women leaders, like, just look at that. On the other side, we have Donald Trump of America and Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom, and fine Modi from India, and Brazilian president, and Iranian president, right? Narcissistic men full of their manliness and their narcissism. And then we have these women. They are not making any noise. They are just acting silently with compassion, with clarity and decisiveness. And as we understand, these six, seven, eight women leaders, they entirely change the definition of leadership. The how you can be compassionate and at the same time so grounded and at the same time so decisive. So I love them, and I think we learned something. This is one of the big takeaway from this whole crisis, that we found this out, that females could make amazing leaders, and probably they are the future of leadership in the world.
I actually tend to agree with you. And I tread lightly here because I'm not so feminist as some people are, but I just feel compassion. You nailed it with that word. That word has been very present in my consciousness for a while now. And it's so key to developing connection and to developing your team, to developing your client, to developing the next decade of leaders, and so on and so forth. Compassion, leading into change. That's one of my core values, Arif, is lean into change, because I know that the pain, that's where the light gets in. That's where the consciousness grows. So this whole interview did not disappoint on any level. And
Absolutely.
I know that we're at our time, but I hope to all of you viewers, you really get the gift that Arif just gave to us today in this interview. I hope that you share this on your timeline, you tag your friends. This is the kind of content that needs to go viral right now. The world needs this message. Made in Crisis. I'm buying it. I'm buying it for every single member of my company. I think it's a must-read book, so go pre-order it on Amazon. And Arif, I will be promoting the heck out of this book ongoing. I am so grateful from the bottom of my heart that there are people like you in the world that dedicate their time and their energy and their life. They make sacrifices away from family or from self to get messages like this out to the world. I can't thank you enough. I really can't.
Thanks so much. A big hug and much love for everyone actually being part of it. And thank you so much for all these amazing, intriguing questions. And yes, it's all coming together. You really summed it up. The communication, getting across each other, and definitely getting in touch with our feelings and the feelings of others, and making sure that we're not giving up on each other,
Yeah,
and we are embracing each other tight. This is important. This is what we learned in 2020. And I think this one lesson must stick with us.
I agree completely. Guys, I need your help in this community. Let's lift Arif up. He totally has more than earned it. And I just have to give massive love to Gennady. Gennady, thank you for making this moment happen. We love you so much. And
Absolutely.
to everybody else, enjoy the rest of the day. Go follow Arif. Go buy his book. We appreciate you.
And we love you. Right, stay stronger. 2021 is right around the corner. Let's change so this next year is different from it has been.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.